There is a category of information that exists at the intersection of ancient prophecy, modern astrophysics, and the direct testimony of individuals who have received transmissions from intelligences that operate outside the ordinary parameters of human experience. A category so consistently pointing in the same direction, across sources so independent of each other and so diverse in their cultural and methodological origins, that the convergence itself constitutes a form of evidence that deserves to be taken seriously, regardless of the discomfort that taking it seriously produces. That category is the event that cultures spanning the full breadth of human civilization have encoded under different names but with the same essential description: a period of darkness. 3 days in which the ordinary relationship between the earth and the light that sustains it is interrupted. A threshold event that separates one configuration of reality from another. A moment that has been anticipated, prepared for, and encoded in the most durable symbolic languages available to every civilization that has ever developed sufficient cosmological sophistication to perceive its approach. The temptation, when encountering this material for the first time, is to reach immediately for one of two equally inadequate responses. The first is dismissal, the reflex of a mind trained to associate prophecy with superstition and ancient knowledge with primitive misunderstanding of natural phenomena that science has since explained. The second is panic, the response of a mind that encounters the possibility of catastrophic disruption without the framework necessary to understand what is actually being described, and therefore fills the gap between the description and the understanding with the most threatening interpretation available. Both responses are understandable. Neither is useful. And neither is what the ancient traditions that encoded this event, or the contact intelligences that have transmitted information about it, were pointing toward as the appropriate response of a prepared consciousness to this knowledge. The appropriate response is preparation. Not the preparation of stockpiling physical supplies, though that is not irrelevant. The preparation of consciousness. The development of the specific quality of inner stability, clarity, and expansive awareness that the event, understood correctly, is asking for. Because what the ancient traditions consistently describe, when you read them carefully rather than through the filter of either dismissal or panic, is not a catastrophe that will destroy the unprepared and spare the prepared. It is a transition, a shift in the frequency of material reality so significant that it reorganizes the relationship between consciousness and the physical world in ways that the current configuration of human awareness is not designed to navigate automatically. The preparation is the development of the configuration of consciousness that can navigate it with intention, rather than being overwhelmed by it. Drop the word ready in the comments right now. If something in what you just heard landed in you, not as fear but as recognition. Hit the like button to bring this to the people who have been sensing this approach without having language for it. Share it with someone in your life who you know is ready to hear it. And if you want to support this work, the Super Chat is how you do it. Independent, unsponsored, following the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of how uncomfortable the destination. The Egyptian tradition is the place to begin, not because it is the oldest encoding of this event, it is not, but because it is the most technically explicit. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, which is more accurately translated as the Book of Coming Forth by Day, is not a mortuary text in the sense that modern interpreters have typically understood it. It is a navigation manual, a set of precise instructions for consciousness moving through a specific kind of transition. A transition in which the ordinary landmarks of material reality are not available, and in which the quality of awareness brought to the experience determines the quality of the experience produced. The specific preparation it prescribes is not ritual in the superficial sense of prescribed behaviors that produce automatic results. It is the development of specific capacities of awareness. The ability to recognize the nature of what is being encountered without being captured by it. The ability to maintain the continuity of identity and intention through conditions that are designed, by their nature, to disrupt both. The ability to move through darkness with the specific quality of inner light that is not dependent on any external source for its existence. The 3 days of darkness in the Egyptian tradition is embedded in the Osirian myth, the death and resurrection cycle that is the central organizing principle of Egyptian cosmology. Osiris, dismembered and scattered by Set, reassembled by Isis, resurrected by the specific knowledge that his consort carries. This myth is not a story about agricultural cycles or political events, as the conventional interpretations suggest. It is a map of the transition that the 3 days of darkness represents. The dismemberment is the dissolution of the ordinary configuration of reality. The scattering is the dispersal of the elements of the self that were organized around that configuration. The reassembly is the reintegration of those elements around a new and larger center. And the resurrection is the emergence of a consciousness on the other side of the transition that retains continuity with what it was before, while being fundamentally different in its relationship to the reality it now inhabits. The Hopi tradition of the American Southwest preserves what is arguably the most detailed and the most practically oriented encoding of the 3 days of darkness event in the indigenous traditions of the Western Hemisphere. The Hopi are not a people given to dramatic prophecy in the sensationalist sense that the word prophecy has acquired in the modern context. They are a people of extraordinary historical continuity. Their presence in the American Southwest extends back further than almost any other continuously inhabited settlement in North America. And their cosmological tradition reflects that continuity in the form of a knowledge system that has been preserved with unusual fidelity across a span of time that makes the most ancient European traditions look recent by comparison. The Hopi describe the current period of human history as the closing of the fourth world and the opening of the fifth. The transition between worlds, in their cosmological framework, is not a gradual process of cultural evolution, but a discrete event, a threshold crossing that happens within a specific period of time and that is preceded by specific signs whose accumulation signals the approach of the transition. The signs they describe, the appearance of a blue star, the deterioration of the natural world, the loss of traditional values, the acceleration of technological development beyond the capacity of wisdom to guide it, the appearance of a gourd of ashes dropped from the sky, have been interpreted in various ways by various researchers, but the structural consistency of the Hopi account with the accounts of other traditions describing the same event is more significant than any particular interpretation of the specific symbols employed. What the Hopi tradition prescribes for the period of transition is significant in its emphasis. It does not prescribe physical preparation, though the Hopi relationship with their land and their agricultural practices reflects a deep pragmatic wisdom about physical survival that is not irrelevant. What it prescribes at the level of the tradition's deepest teaching is a specific quality of inner orientation. The Hopi concept of kachina, the living spirit forces that mediate between human consciousness and the larger reality structure in which it is embedded, is directly relevant here. The kachinas are not gods in the sense of omnipotent beings to be propitiated through ritual. They are intelligences, presences that are available to human consciousness that has developed the specific quality of receptivity that makes contact with them possible. And the cultivation of that receptivity, the specific inner orientation of humility, clarity, and openness that makes the kachina relationship possible, is precisely the preparation that the Hopi tradition identifies as most essential for the period of transition. The resonance of this with the contact research is not accidental. The intelligences encountered in the deepest contact experiences, the ones that deliver substantive transmissions about the nature of reality and the direction of human development, rather than simply demonstrating their existence through dramatic physical phenomena, are not accessible to all configurations of consciousness equally. The contact record consistently shows that the quality and depth of the transmission received is directly correlated with the quality and depth of the awareness of the person receiving it. Consciousness that is contracted, defensive, dominated by fear, or by the aggressive need to confirm a particular interpretation of the experience receives less and interprets what it receives less accurately than consciousness that is open, stable, genuinely receptive to whatever the experience actually contains, rather than what the experiencer wants or fears it to contain. The preparation for contact and the preparation for the transition are the same preparation. The Essenes, the Jewish mystical community that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls and whose cosmological sophistication has been consistently underestimated by mainstream scholarship, encoded a version of the 3 days of darkness event that is particularly interesting because of its explicit connection to the astronomical cycles that modern science is beginning to confirm as relevant to the phenomenon. The Essene calendar, a solar calendar of remarkable precision that was deliberately different from the lunar calendar used by mainstream Jewish tradition, was calibrated to astronomical cycles whose significance extends beyond the annual agricultural rhythms that most ancient calendars were designed to track. The Essene tracking of what they called the War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness, described in the Dead Sea Scroll known as the War Scroll, is not a description of a military conflict. It is a description of a cosmological transition in which the balance between two fundamental principles of reality shifts in a way that reorganizes the structure of human experience. The Sons of Darkness in the Essene cosmology are not evil in a simple moral sense. They are the principle of density, of contraction, of the limitation of consciousness to the material frequency, the same principle that the Saturn cosmology describes as the architect of the prison of matter. And the War Scroll's description of the transition from the dominance of that principle to the dominance of the Sons of Light is a description, in the symbolic language of the Essene tradition, of precisely the kind of frequency shift that the 3 days of darkness event represents. A period of maximum darkness, of the complete temporary dominance of the contracting principle, followed by a transition to a new configuration in which the relationship between consciousness and the material world is fundamentally reorganized. The astronomical dimension of this encoding is where the modern scientific data becomes directly relevant. The galactic current sheet, the thin layer of plasma that runs through the center of the galactic plane and that the solar system crosses periodically as it moves through its galactic orbit, has been identified by a growing number of researchers working at the intersection of plasma physics and galactic dynamics as a potential physical mechanism for the kind of electromagnetic disruption that the ancient traditions describe as the physical dimension of the 3 days of darkness event. When the solar system crosses the galactic current sheet, the electromagnetic environment of the entire solar system is altered in ways that have direct consequences for solar activity, for the behavior of the geomagnetic field of the Earth, and potentially for the specific electromagnetic conditions that support the ordinary functioning of human neurology and consciousness. The work of Paul Laviolette, a systems scientist with a doctorate from Portland State University, has been particularly significant in this area. His research into what he calls galactic superwaves, periodic outflows of cosmic ray and electromagnetic energy from the galactic center that arrive at the solar system with consequences for the entire electromagnetic environment of the inner planets, provides a physical framework for the ancient traditions' descriptions of periodic catastrophic events associated with specific astronomical configurations. Laviolette's timeline for the recurrence of galactic superwave events correlates, with a precision that has not been adequately explained by mainstream astrophysics, with the periods identified in the ancient calendar systems as transition points between world ages. The correlation is not perfect. The uncertainties in both the ancient calendar interpretations and the galactic superwave timing are significant enough to prevent definitive conclusions, but it is close enough to be significant. Close enough to suggest that the ancient traditions were tracking real astronomical cycles and encoding real physical events in their cosmological frameworks, not inventing comforting narratives to explain the otherwise inexplicable. The solar dimension of the phenomenon is equally significant. The sun is not a stable, constant output system. It is a dynamic, complex, and still not fully understood plasma body whose activity cycles have direct consequences for the electromagnetic environment of every planet in the solar system. The 11-year sunspot cycle is the most familiar of these cycles, but it is embedded within longer cycles, the approximately 200-year grand solar minimum and maximum cycles, the approximately 2,000-year cycles that appear in the paleoclimatic record, and longer cycles still whose recurrence intervals extend beyond the span of instrumented observation but are visible in geological and ice core data that produce consequences of a qualitatively different order from the ordinary. Fluctuations of the 11-year cycle. The convergence of multiple solar cycles at a common maximum or minimum, the kind of convergence that occurs rarely but with a periodicity that matches the transition points identified in the ancient calendar systems, produces electromagnetic conditions in the near-Earth environment that are without precedent in the period of modern instrumented observation, and whose consequences for both the physical systems of the Earth and the biological and neurological systems of its inhabitants are genuinely unknown. The geomagnetic field of the Earth, The invisible electromagnetic structure that surrounds the planet and shields it from the full intensity of solar and cosmic radiation has been weakening at an accelerating rate for at least the past 2 centuries, and possibly much longer. The weakening is documented, measured, and not seriously disputed by mainstream geophysics. What is disputed is its significance and its trajectory. The mainstream position is that the weakening is a normal fluctuation associated with a gradual magnetic pole shift, a process that has occurred many times in geological history and that, while disruptive, does not represent a catastrophic threat to life on Earth. The alternative position, supported by a growing body of paleomagnetic and geological evidence, is that the current weakening is approaching a threshold, an excursion event in which the field does not simply shift, but temporarily collapses, reducing to a fraction of its current strength before reorganizing in a new configuration. The period of collapse, which the paleomagnetic record suggests can occur over timescales ranging from decades to centuries, would expose the surface of the Earth to levels of solar and cosmic radiation that have not been experienced since the last such event, approximately 40,000 years ago. The 3 days of darkness in this physical framework is not a supernatural event. It is a natural one, the intersection of multiple astronomical and geophysical cycles at a point of convergence that produces conditions outside the range of ordinary human experience, but well within the range of what the physical evidence shows has happened before. The ancient traditions that encoded this event were not inventing prophecy. They were preserving the memory of direct experience, the experience of civilizations that lived through previous versions of this transition and encoded what they learned about it in the most durable symbolic languages available to them, specifically so that the civilizations that came after them would not be caught entirely unprepared. The contact intelligences that have been transmitting information about this event across the decades of the modern contact era are not delivering new information. They are delivering the same information that the ancient traditions preserved, updated to the specific symbolic and conceptual language of the civilization now approaching the transition. The content is consistent, the preparation prescribed is consistent, and the urgency of the transmission is increasing, not in the sense of alarm or panic, which the intelligences consistently avoid, but in the sense of a calibrated response to the proximity of the event. The transmissions are becoming more frequent, more explicit, and more practically oriented as the approach of the threshold becomes more apparent in the physical data. Block 03. The preparation that the ancient traditions and the contact transmissions consistently prescribe is not complicated. It is not esoteric in the sense of being available only to initiates who have spent decades in specialized training. It is not dependent on any particular religious framework or cosmological belief system. It is, at its core, a quality of consciousness, a specific configuration of awareness that is available to any human being who chooses to develop it, and that makes the difference, in the conditions the transition produces, between a consciousness that navigates the experience and one that is overwhelmed by it. The first element of that preparation is the development of what the traditions consistently call inner light, not a metaphor, not a poetic description of optimism or positive thinking, a specific quality of awareness that is not dependent on external conditions for its existence, that does not require the ordinary sensory inputs of the material world to maintain its coherence and its orientation. The 3 days of darkness, whatever its specific physical mechanism, produces conditions in which the ordinary external anchors of consciousness, light, the familiar sensory landscape of the material world, the social confirmation of shared reality that human beings depend on more than they typically realize, are temporarily unavailable. The consciousness that has developed an internal source of orientation, a quality of awareness that knows what it is independent of external confirmation, navigates those conditions with a stability that is simply not available to consciousness that has never developed that internal resource. The development of inner light is what every genuine contemplative tradition has always been pointing toward, under whatever name its specific cultural context made available. The Buddhist tradition calls it Rigpa, the natural awareness that is present before and after every thought, every sensation, every experience, and that is the actual ground of consciousness rather than any of its specific contents. The Christian mystical tradition calls it the divine spark, the specific quality of awareness that participates in the nature of the divine, and that cannot be extinguished by any external condition because its source is not external. The Sufi tradition calls it the heart, not the emotional heart, but the specific center of awareness that is capable of direct perception of reality without the mediation of conceptual frameworks that always simplify and distort what they attempt to represent. The names are different. The territory they are pointing at is the same, and the methods developed by each tradition to cultivate access to that territory, while they differ in their specific techniques, share a common structural logic: the systematic reduction of the noise that prevents consciousness from perceiving the signal that is always already present beneath it. The second element of preparation is what the traditions call equanimity, the specific quality of inner stability that allows consciousness to encounter conditions of radical uncertainty and disruption without being destabilized by them. Equanimity is not indifference. It is not the emotional flatness of a consciousness that has suppressed its capacity for feeling in order to avoid being overwhelmed by it. It is the specific stability of a consciousness that has developed sufficient depth of inner resource to remain centered in the face of the full intensity of experience, to feel completely, to perceive clearly, and to respond wisely, all simultaneously, without the reactive contraction that ordinarily occurs when experience exceeds the comfortable range. The development of equanimity is, in practical terms, the development of the capacity to be with what is, to encounter the present moment in its full reality, whatever that reality contains, without the automatic flight into either denial or overwhelm that characterizes the unprepared consciousness. In the conditions of the 3 days of darkness, the present moment will contain things that the ordinary configuration of consciousness is not designed to encounter comfortably. The disruption of the ordinary electromagnetic environment has documented effects on human neurology and consciousness, effects that the contact transmissions consistently describe as the mechanism by which the transition opens access to dimensions of reality that are ordinarily below the threshold of human perception. The consciousness that has developed equanimity experiences those effects as an opening. The consciousness that has not experiences them as a crisis. The third element of preparation is community. The traditions that have preserved the most detailed and practically useful knowledge about the transition consistently emphasize that the navigation of it is not a solitary project. The Hopi tradition speaks of the importance of maintaining the village, of the specific quality of human connection and mutual support that makes the collective navigation of extreme conditions possible in a way that individual navigation is not. The Essene community that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls was not simply a group of individuals who happened to share similar beliefs. It was a deliberately constructed community of preparation, a group of people who had organized their lives around the specific project of developing, individually and collectively, the quality of consciousness that the approaching transition required. The contact transmissions are explicit on this point in a way that is sometimes overlooked in the individual focus of much contact research. The beings consistently describe the transition as a collective event, something that happens to a species, not to isolated individuals. And they consistently describe the development of communities of prepared consciousness as one of the most significant contributions that individuals who have received and integrated the transmission can make to the collective navigation of what is coming. Not communities organized around a specific belief system, or a charismatic leader, or a set of prescribed practices. Communities organized around the quality of honest inquiry, genuine mutual support, and the shared commitment to developing the inner resources that the transition requires. The practical dimension of this is worth being explicit about, because the tendency of the human mind, when confronted with the possibility of a significant disruption to the ordinary conditions of material life, is to focus exclusively on the physical dimension of preparation. Food, water, shelter, the material resources necessary for physical survival. Those preparations are not irrelevant. The ancient traditions that encoded the 3 days of darkness event consistently included practical guidance about physical preparation alongside their guidance about inner preparation. But they consistently identified the inner preparation as primary, as the foundation without which the physical preparations are insufficient and with which they become expressions of a wisdom that extends beyond mere survival into the territory of genuine transformation. Because the 3 days of darkness, in the framework of every tradition that has encoded it, is not primarily a survival event. It is a transformation event, a threshold crossing that produces, on the other side of it, a configuration of human consciousness and human civilization that is qualitatively different from what existed before it. The physical disruption is real. The challenge to ordinary human experience is real. But the disruption and the challenge are in service of something, in service of the specific reorganization of the relationship between human consciousness and the material world that the convergence of astronomical and geophysical cycles is producing, and that the long curriculum of guided human development has been building toward across the full span of recorded history. The contact intelligences describe what lies on the other side of the transition, in terms that are consistent across decades of independent testimony and that share a specific quality of restraint, a deliberate avoidance of the kind of utopian description that would produce either passive waiting or active fantasy, rather than the genuine inner preparation that the event requires. They do not describe a paradise. They do not describe a world without challenge or without the specific qualities of human experience that emerge from the encounter of consciousness with limitation. They describe a world in which the specific limitations that have defined the human experience of material reality up to this point are reorganized in ways that make new dimensions of experience available. Dimensions that the current configuration of human consciousness cannot fully perceive or articulate, but that the expanded configuration produced by the transition will inhabit as naturally as the current configuration inhabits the material world it knows. The frequency of the material world shifts. The relationship between consciousness and physical reality changes in ways that make the kinds of contact that have historically been rare and exceptional become more accessible to a wider range of human beings. The intelligences that have been present in our reality across the full span of human history become more directly available to human consciousness that has developed the specific capacities that make genuine contact possible. And the project of human civilization, the long, difficult, magnificent project of developing a form of consciousness that is capable of participating as a full partner in the community of intelligences that inhabits this cosmos, takes a step forward of a magnitude that makes every previous step in that direction look incremental by comparison. This is what the preparation is for, not survival, participation. The development of the quality of consciousness that can participate fully and wisely in what the transition makes available, that can receive what the opening of the frequency brings without being overwhelmed by it, that can engage with the intelligences that become more accessible without losing the specific quality of human awareness that makes that engagement valuable, that can inhabit the new configuration of reality with the full depth and intensity of presence that the human capacity for experience makes possible. That participation is available to every human being who chooses to prepare for it. The preparation is not reserved for the spiritually advanced or the cosmologically sophisticated. It is available in the ordinary conditions of an ordinary life, through the simple but demanding practice of honest inquiry, genuine presence, and the consistent choice to develop the inner resources that the moment is asking for, rather than retreating into the comfort of a framework too small to hold what is coming. The 3 days of darkness are not the end of the story. They are the turn of the page. And what is written on the page that follows depends, more than any previous page in the human story has depended, on the quality of consciousness that the human beings living through this moment choose to bring to the writing of it. Bloco final. There is a specific quality of readiness that is different from preparedness in the ordinary sense. Preparedness is a condition of the external, the stockpiling of resources, the acquisition of knowledge, the construction of plans and contingencies designed to manage a future event whose specific contours are not yet fully known. Readiness is a condition of the internal. It is the specific quality of a consciousness that has done sufficient inner work, that it meets whatever arrives, not with the reactive contraction of a self that is trying to protect what it has, but with the open, stable, grounded presence of an awareness that knows what it is independent of external circumstances, and therefore cannot be fundamentally threatened by any change in those circumstances, however radical. The distinction matters enormously in the context of the 3 days of darkness, because the event, understood correctly, is specifically designed, if design is the right word for a process that operates at the intersection of cosmic cycles and guided human development, to reveal the difference between these two qualities in the consciousness of every human being who lives through it. The external preparations will be useful. They will matter in the practical sense of supporting physical survival through conditions that disrupt the ordinary infrastructure of material life. But they will not be sufficient. And for the consciousness that has relied on them exclusively, that has focused entirely on the outer dimension of preparation, while neglecting the inner dimension that the traditions and the contact transmissions consistently identify as primary, the event will produce a specific kind of crisis. Not the crisis of physical danger, which the physical preparations address, but the crisis of a self that has lost its external anchors and discovers, in that loss, that it does not have an internal one. That discovery, in the conditions of the transition, is not merely uncomfortable. It is the specific experience that the ancient traditions encoded as the darkness within the darkness, the inner night that accompanies the outer one, the dissolution of the ordinary self-sense that occurs when the external conditions that have always supported and confirmed it are temporarily withdrawn. For the unprepared consciousness, that dissolution is experienced as annihilation, as the destruction of everything that matters, of the self that has organized its entire existence around the external landmarks that are no longer available. For the prepared consciousness, the same dissolution is experienced as liberation, as the falling away of a limitation that was never native to what consciousness actually is, the revelation of an inner resource that was always present, but had been invisible behind the noise of the ordinary conditions that are now, temporarily and necessarily, silent. The silence is the gift. The darkness is the teacher. And what it teaches, what it has always taught in every version of this threshold that human civilization has approached and crossed across the long arc of its development, is the single most important thing that consciousness can know about itself, that it does not require external light to see, that the awareness which perceives the darkness is itself a form of light, not dependent on any physical source, not extinguishable by any physical condition, not reducible to any of the specific contents it illuminates. That what you are, at the level that is actually you rather than the configuration of self that the ordinary conditions of material life have produced, is not threatened by the 3 days of darkness. It is revealed by them. The contact beings who have been transmitting information about this event across the decades of the modern contact era have been consistent on this point in a way that the more dramatic elements of their transmissions tend to overshadow. The 3 days of darkness in their framework is not primarily an event that happens to humanity. It is an event that happens through humanity, an event in which the specific quality of human consciousness, forged in the specific conditions of material existence with all its intensity and limitation and beauty, is called upon to demonstrate what it has become through the long curriculum of guided development that has brought it to this threshold. The demonstration is not for the benefit of the contact intelligences, who already know what human consciousness is capable of. It is for the benefit of human consciousness itself, the specific, irreplaceable recognition that can only come from direct experience of one's own nature under conditions that strip away every external support and leave nothing but what is actually there. What is actually there is more than the ordinary conditions of material life have ever required you to know. More than the consensus reality of the civilization you have been living in has ever given you permission to claim. More than the specific self that emerged from your particular history and your particular cultural context has ever been large enough to fully inhabit. The 3 days of darkness creates the conditions in which all of that becomes unavoidable, in which the more that you are becomes not a philosophical proposition or a spiritual aspiration, but a lived, undeniable, direct experience that reorganizes everything that follows it. Everything that follows it. That is the phrase that matters most in this entire conversation. Because the 3 days of darkness is not the end. It is not even primarily the event itself. It is what comes after. The configuration of human consciousness and human civilization that emerges on the other side of the threshold, shaped by what was discovered in the darkness, informed by the specific recognition that only the darkness makes possible, and oriented toward a future that the pre-threshold version of humanity could glimpse but not fully inhabit. That future is what the ancient traditions were encoding when they described the fifth world, the New Jerusalem, the age of Aquarius, the golden age that every cosmological tradition places at the end of the cycle of darkness and limitation. Not a utopia in the naive sense of a world without challenge or without the specific qualities of human experience that emerge from the encounter of consciousness with difficulty. A world in which the relationship between consciousness and difficulty has been reorganized, in which the challenges are real but the resources available to meet them are vastly greater than what the pre-threshold configuration of human consciousness had access to, in which the contact with non-human intelligence that has historically been rare and exceptional becomes a regular feature of human experience, because the frequency of human consciousness has shifted sufficiently to make that contact accessible in ways that the previous configuration did not permit, in which the specific quality of awareness that the long curriculum of guided development has been cultivating across the full span of human history finally has a world large enough to inhabit fully. You are alive at the approach of that threshold, not by accident, not by the random distribution of souls across historical moments that makes some generations witnesses to minor fluctuations and others witnesses to civilizational turning points, by the specific deliberate assignment of a consciousness that was ready, that had developed across whatever span of experience produced it, the specific capacities that this moment requires, and that this moment will call upon in ways that no previous moment in your life has called upon them. The readiness you are developing now, through the practice of honest inquiry, through the sustained engagement with evidence that disrupts comfortable frameworks, through the specific quality of attention you have been bringing to this material and everything it has asked of you, that readiness is not preparation for something that might happen. It is preparation for something that is happening. The threshold is not ahead of you in the way that a destination is ahead of a traveler who has not yet begun the journey. It is ahead of you in the way that dawn is ahead of someone who has been awake through the night, close enough to feel, close enough that the specific quality of darkness that immediately precedes the light is already distinguishable from the darkness of the middle of the night, already carrying in it the specific quality of imminence that those who have watched for dawn before know how to recognize. Watch for it, prepare for it, not with the anxious hypervigilance of a consciousness that is afraid of what it is watching for, but with the specific quality of alert, grounded, open presence that is the natural posture of a consciousness that knows what it is and therefore knows that what is coming, whatever its specific form, is something it is equipped to meet. That equipment is not external. It was never external. It is what you are, beneath every layer of conditioning and limitation and constructed self that the ordinary conditions of material life have produced. The 3 days of darkness will show you that. It will show everyone that. The only question is whether the showing arrives as a revelation or as a crisis. And the answer to that question is being determined right now, in the quality of the inner work that each consciousness alive in this moment chooses or does not choose to do. Do the work. That is the only instruction that ultimately matters. Do the work of honest inquiry. Do the work of genuine presence. Do the work of developing the inner stability and the expansive awareness that the moment is asking for. Do it in the ordinary conditions of your ordinary life, in the small moments and the large ones, in the moments when it feels urgent, and the moments when it feels impossible to sustain. Do it because the consciousness that does it is the consciousness that will be ready, and readiness, in what is coming, is the most important thing a human being can offer, to themselves, to the people around them, and to the larger process of human development that has been building toward this threshold across a span of time that makes the entire history of recorded civilization look like a single step in a very long journey. The journey is approaching its next great turn. You are on it. You have always been on it. And the quality of consciousness you choose to bring to the turning, the depth of your presence, the honesty of your inquiry, the courage with which you follow the truth wherever it leads, that is your contribution to what comes after, to the world that emerges from the 3 days, to the humanity that discovers in the darkness what it actually is, to the future that becomes possible when that discovery is made and integrated and lived, fully and without reservation, in the light that follows.